All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the War Room, courtesy of YouTube. I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. My co host, Logic's Finest, is also here today. First and foremost, we just want to give a shout out to our subscribers. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. Hope you all are doing well today here in America or elsewhere in the world. This is the first episode being done during the midst of the weekday. Usually we have our podcast towards the weekend, but we decided to throw in an extra one going forward just to kind of help speed the timeline a bit, but at the same time, definitely get more into depths of our discussion, particularly this discussion with Adolf Hitler during the 1920s. So, before we get started, let me just introduce once again my co-host, Mr. Logic's Finest. Sir, how you doing on today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Not too bad, sir. Not too bad. Just kind of rushed home from work, grabbed a quick bite to eat, and now just ready to, as they say, dive in.
Yeah. Hey, listen. By all means, by all means. You know, man, I really, I didn't get a chance to send you some information
Mm.
that I saw over the weekend. In fact, over the last 2 days, some very informative information about Russia and the military and what's going on in the Ukraine, and how, according to a Russian officer, that their generals were struggling to get their pilots flight time, so they're averaging like 8 flight hours a month. And he said that
Mm.
basically, being a fighter pilot is a perishable skill. So he says to the point where at only 8 flight hours a month, you're struggling to maintain your landing and takeoff abilities, and that means that your combat skills are like non-existent. And so the guy the guy whose stream I was watching, he's a former Navy fighter pilot. He
Mm.
taught at the Naval War College. He taught at Annapolis. He's written 2 books, and he has his own podcast. And he said that, from his experience from the U.S. Navy, at a bare minimum, they try to get their Navy carrier pilots a minimum of 40 flight hours a month, at a minimum.
Yeah, that definitely sounds about right. Cause I remember one of my good friends who is still, I guess, in the reserves for the Air Force. But
Mhm.
he would tell me that for the Air Force, they had to average at least 40 to 50 flight hours a month. So that's definitely from an American standard, that sounds definitely about right. And like you said, being a fighter pilot, that's considered a perishable position. And obviously so because when you look at the history of fighter pilots and just fighter planes in general, that's where you see a lot of the dog fights in the air.
Right. So this guy was saying, from his personal viewpoint, it shows a lack of why there has been next to no Russian air presence. Is that if their pilots are struggling to average 8 flight hours a month, that shows that the ground commanders don't have the confidence in the Russian Air Force to conduct close operations support, which means that they have a very real concern that their fighters could bomb their own troops. So, like, that's mind blowing. Much less, clearly, at eight flight hours a month, your dog fighting skills are literally zero.
And correct me if I'm wrong, before the invasion of Poland, I want to say the Luftwaffe, they were averaging at least 20 hours of flight time, as far as with their fighter pilots, their bombers, right before leading up to the invasion of Poland. So, like Eisen Sama said in the chat, only 8 hours, yes, that is dangerously low for a military unit to only average that much flight time when World War II was the birthplace of, you could say, it was the birthplace of aerial,
Naval
naval,
air power.
aerial, right.
Yeah, I don't know offhand how many flight hours the Luftwaffe was giving their pilots. Honestly, I don't know. I am
Mm,
curious. I'm definitely gonna check that out. But I had no knowledge that it was all that they were averaging 8 flight hours a month. And as this former pilot said, he said at 8 hours, you're literally at the point of where you're struggling with your landing and takeoff skills. He said it's that serious. So if the Russian pilots are only getting 8 flight hours a month, that's zero dogfighting ability. Um, their proficiency in using aerial weapons, firing missiles, targeting, conducting flight ops is zero, and you absolutely cannot conduct close air support or close in ground support, because
mm.
that means that again, the ground commanders have zero confidence that their own pilots won't bomb their own troops. So that is amazing. And then apparently, several officers who were who were now POWs said that the Russian troops, they were using a lot of conscripts. Now, conscripts are
Whoa.
not people who were drafted. Conscripts mean that someone showed up to your house, put a gun to your chest or your head, and said, "You're coming to fight for us."
Mm-hmm.
So some of them were literally dish, Russian dishwashers and bakers and butchers. Some of them are Syrians, that they're
Wow.
conscripts fighting on the front lines, and that some of them, they had no idea that they were even going to war. Like some of them, they were told it was an exercise. Some of them, they didn't even know they were physically inside Ukraine until they started hearing bullets flying past their ears. So if that is the military force that Putin is bringing to bear, I don't know, man. I just don't know.
I'm speechless right now because, I mean, we have been talking about how these leaders so far, for some of them, their lack of understanding and their lack of having forthright and awareness of the world around them truly shows in their leadership skills, especially when it came to the military front. And I can only imagine, based off of what you just shared, the the Russian jet fighters are only averaging 8 hours of flight time. The Army is using conscripts, as you mentioned. These are guys who have little to no military experience
Zero.
and putting them on the front line.
Well,
That says a lot about the Russian military.
it really does. And so the funny thing is, right? So then, apparently, apparently, Putin over the last 20 to 25 years, the bulk of the R&D budget has gone towards stealth fighters and the MiGs and the Sukhois. But close to 80% of the budget has gone to that. So, and as big as Russia is, and with all the money that Russia has, the figure that he threw out was total annual defense spending of $60 billion.
Mm.
Contrast that to America, which spends 300-400 billion a year. It's a
Mm-hmm.
drop in the bucket. And again, the majority of that budget has gone towards next generation fighters. Now, with that said, it does not get a lot of American press for obvious reasons. But there are military people who speak on the fact that when it comes to fighter technology, Russia has had a technological advantage for decades. The
Mm-hmm.
MiGs and the Sukhois, going back to the 60s, were superior fighters, superior technologies to anything that America had. Russia never had the resources or the capability to build them in large numbers. That's the difference. So there was a lot of propaganda, a lot of Hollywood propaganda, a lot of DoD propaganda. In fact, the the F-22 Raptor, one of the biggest selling points was the thrust vectoring nozzles that gave it amazing maneuverability in flight.
Mm-hmm.
That's technology that was literally in service in Russia first. Lockheed saw MiG and Sukhoi using that technology, and they copied it. So that goes to show the advanced technology for aerospace fighters that Russia has had, but they never had the capability to build these things in large numbers. And let's not even talk about their rusting navy, which is
Oh
practically
yeah.
non-existent.
Yeah.
So the Russian military, even before this invasion, the Navy and the Army has largely been a paper tiger, and people have been ignoring uh, um, whistleblowers, or rather, for lack of a better term, alarm ringers, or whatever term you want to use, have been saying
Mm.
for years that the bulk of the Soviet military is rusted. It's not well maintained, and that outside of the fighters and the nuclear missiles, it's a giant paper tiger.
And even with the fighters, it's just like, okay, the plane itself is modern, but if your fighters are only averaging 8 hours a month worth of flying time, I'm sorry, I can't really see how effective they could be in an actual dogfight.
Which brings us back to World War II, which is our mutual passion.
Hmm.
The Japanese military, they would not rotate their carrier pilots back to the rear to train new
Hmm.
pilots.
Yes, sir.
So for the last 18 months of the war, they had rookie pilots, and all of their senior pilots were dying in service. So when you have rookie pilots with no experience, they're of no value to you. When you have veteran pilots, but they're only getting 8 flight hours a month, they're of no value to you. So what do you have? You have the same exact situation the Japanese had the last 18 months of that war. Pilots with little to no experience. I mean,
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, the
mhm.
Zero was definitely a deadly fighter. When in the right hands of a veteran pilot, it it did a lot of damage during the early part of the Pacific War. But like you said, because the Japanese did not utilize the training aspect of rotating your pilots from the front lines back in rotation to train the new pilots. I'll tell you this much: when we get into the Battle of Midway, which is
Mm,
the pivotal point,
right.
you literally going to see why that battle was was pretty much the wound that killed Japan, because it wasn't so much about the ships they lost, the four aircraft carriers, because Japan could replace the carriers at least one within a year. They had the resources. But when you lose over 400 of your best pilots in one setting, there was no coming back.
There was no coming back. And yeah, Japan could have replaced the carriers, but they literally lost half the carrier force in one day.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So at the start of that day, the Japanese Imperial Navy had 8 aircraft carriers. At the end of that very same day, they had 4 carriers. You can't You cannot sustain losing half of your carrier force in one day. Even
Mm-hmm.
America at that time could not have withstood that kind of a loss. But
Not.
it's listen. I am going to send you. I'm going to send you the link when we're done to his podcast, so you can hear this for yourself. And again, it blows my mind to think how much of a paper tiger the Russian military is. Because I have to be honest with you, I was sitting here thinking that, well, Putin is showing restraint. This is not a real invasion. It's a systematic walkthrough. He hasn't called the dogs out yet. He's taking his time. Apparently, he's not. He doesn't have any dogs. He has poodles. And you know, also, this the same guy pointed out the lack the lack of experience. When you look at the columns are supposed to be single file
Mm-hmm.
with adequate spacing. When their columns would encounter any resistance, they would bunch up. Tell me the last time you've seen military columns three abreast and stopped. And then the Ukrainians were using combat tactics 101. Hit the
Mm-hmm.
lead vehicle, hit the rearmost vehicle, create chaos, and then pick them off one by one from the middle out. And the Russians showed poor discipline from top to bottom. We're looking at a force that is incapable. They are combat ineffective. And I have to admit, I'm surprised. I did not see this coming at all.
Yeah, that's. Oh my goodness, that's. I'll put it like this. I'm with you. I was assuming, sure, the Air Force for Russia may not be up there as top tier overall versus America, but I at least was under the notion of thinking that, you know, they definitely do some sort of training to kind of get their men military ready. And, you know, you hear about the conflicts going on before that with Ukraine and everything. I would at least assume that this was a battle ready type of country.
Right.
But when you tell me, and believe me, it does kind of make you wonder when you watch some of the newsreels today and you notice that they don't really show too much of the Russian side invading. It just mainly been on Ukraine side. You seeing missiles flying and everything, a few helicopters here and there. But when you're telling me that they are mainly using conscripts as their frontline men, and that their best fighters are only doing 8 hours of flight time per month.
Yeah.
That's I'm sorry. That's definitely, as they say, a glass jaw. Not intimidating from the start.
Yeah. It's you know I just want to address something here. So um male monkey, you have to understand something. And this is something that you have to really, really understand because there have been a lot of military people who have been talking about this since Russia collapsed in the early 90s. On an individual basis, the the planes that the Russian Air Force has, the MiGs and the Sukhois, they have consistently been superior to anything that America has. The problem is, Russia did not and does not have the resources or the capabilities to build them in large numbers. So if you have the F-15, the F-16, the F-18, even the F-22, every one of those planes, Russia has something that is superior. Do not believe the media American hype. But here's the problem: if if there's 100 to every American plane to one of those Russian planes, it's It's not even a conversation,
Mm.
much less a contest. And if the pilots are only averaging 8 flight hours a month, the capabilities are irrelevant because the pilots literally
Mm.
do not have the skills to utilize them. That's why we're not seeing, again, this, I'm speechless. I'm speechless.
Honestly, before we jump into our readings and everything, this scenario, as you point out, if if you have an American pilot now to go face off with any of the Russian fighters based off of your information, I can see a repeat of the Mariana turkey shoot.
Well,
And what I mean
see,
by that is the Mariana turkey shoot. eh, Keep in mind, this is Japan versus America during the Battle of the Marianas.
mm,
And this is not too long right after the Battle of Midway. So just keep in mind, their best fighters, 300, over 300, gone because of the Battle of Midway. So most of your fighter pilots that fight the Zeros at the time, these were guys who were fresh out of flight school, meaning they
they're
it'd be
combat ineffective. They have
com-
no experience. If you're fresh
combat.
out of flight school, you're combat ineffective. No experience. You don't have battle skills and tactics. You only have what you've learned in flight school. That's it.
Right.
And
So,
I'm sorry.
oh, I was going to say the ratio of they said for the Mariana turkey shoot, for every one U.S. fighter that was shot down, the Americans shot down 27 Japanese fighters.
Yeah,
That's how bad the Mariana turkey shoot was.
that is an insane number. And I just wanted, because we're actually going to get started, and
Mm.
I apologize for kind of hijacking our start
Oh
here,
no,
but
this is good because it kind of ties in line of bad military decisions can come from bad leadership. So it
well,
actually highlights exactly what we talk about.
so I just want to be clear again, because um, Male Monkey, you're talking about these are not goat herders. Understand what's going on here. Several officers in the Russian army have been captured. Several POWs have been captured. And what they're saying is a large portion of the fighting force that is in Ukraine, they're using conscripts. Some are
Mm-hmm.
Russian, some are all the way from Syria. They're conscripts. Now, conscripts is a person who, you're sitting in your house, your door gets knocked on, someone comes in with a gun and tells you, come up, you're going into the army, you're going to fight. No basic training, nothing. They get shipped off. They may or may not be even issued a uniform. They stick a gun in their hand, and they're told you're going to war. That's what a conscript is. So if that is the situation of the Russian fighting force, that they're using conscripts, that is mind blowing. And again, if you look at the combat discipline, there's no logistics and supply. You have vehicles that are stopped on the side of the road running out of fuel. This is combat 101 tactics. The columns, you have units riding 2 and 3 abreast. You ride single file, and when encountering resistance, there's clearly no combat training. So all that I'm saying is it's it's becoming more and more apparent that we have been sold on a paper tiger, and that to me is surprising. It's just mind blowing.
Indeed, indeed. Well, let us go ahead and get right into the meat of the stream.
Mm,
And don't get me wrong, we will definitely get back into Russia because they will be next up on our talk of Russia during the 1920s. And we'll definitely have more to talk about with them. in regards of what's going on. But Mail Monkey, we're going to put that to the side now. We're switching gears. We're going straight into our dialogue about Hitler and what was going on during the beer hall putsch. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started.
Execute.
All right. So we last left off on section 4 of the midst of the beer hall pooch. And so we're now going to continue where we left off in regards to the events that were happening that night of November the 23rd, 1923. So it starts off by saying there was also high emotion across the Isar at the Lowen Brokeller, The main hall, resounding with the blasts of two brass bands, was jammed with more than 2,000 members of the Battle League and SA. Only a small part of the audience was made up of the scar-faced Captain Rom's fanatic followers, but he was the main attraction. He called for revenge and retaliation against the traitors and the despoilers of our people. Then Esser, who had dragged himself from a sickbed, mounted the podium. The plan had been changed somewhat, and he did not charge up the aisle carrying a flag or immediately announce the revolution. He was to wait for word that Hitler's coup had succeeded. In the middle of his speech, at 8:40 p.m., a cryptic telephone message was received from the Burger Brockkeller. Safely delivered. Rom purposely strode up to the platform and interrupted Esser. The Kahr government, he shouted, had been disposed, and Adolf Hitler had declared a national revolution. Reichswehr soldiers tore off the Republic cockades from their hats, leaped onto tables and chairs shouting. Stormtroopers embraced each other. The band blared out of the national anthem. When the pandemonium subsided, Rom shouted to everyone to march on the Burger Brockkeller. The men piled out of the Lowen Brockkeller as if it were on fire and formed up. With shouting and cheers, the raucous army started down the street towards the Isar River. A motorcycle carrier stopped the procession with new marching orders from Hitler. Rom's men were to turn towards the university and occupy General von Lussau's headquarters on the Schonfeldstrasse. The stormtroopers were to proceed to St. Annaplatz, pick up a cache of 3,000 rifles in the basement of the monastery, then take up positions at Gießen. Only the Bahn Oberland was to continue on to the Burger Brockkeller. As Rom's force marched down the Briennerstrasse, followed by one of the brass bands, gathering crowds cheered them on. Near the head of the column, proudly holding an Imperial War flag, was a fervent young nationalist, there because of allegiance to Rom and Strasser, not Hitler. His name was Heinrich Himmler.
Uh-oh.
Yes, sir. So now we get to meet one of the main players that will play a huge role in the Nazi regime. But this is when he was just a teenager.
Little did he know he would rise to become the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany.
Very little. So it says, the enthusiasm of jubilant onlookers was heady, and the men continued like conquerors up the broad Ludwigstrasse to the entrance of the military district building. Rom halted his troops outside the gates and strode into the building where he had worked for so many years. The guards threatened to shoot, but Rom outfaced them. He marched up to the second floor to the office of the duty officer, who declared that he was bowing only to force, and then gave the order to open the gates to the rioters. Rom posted guards and emplaced machine guns at windows and strong barbed wire around the building. He did just about everything except take over the telephone switchboard. This, incredibly, he left in charge of the duty officer who had no revolutionary leanings. So far at the moment, what we're seeing is while we last left off with Hitler trying to negotiate with von Kahr, von Lusaus and them, and even Ludendorff was somewhat trying to help in this regard. Now we're starting to see the SA trying to maneuver itself for potential overtaking. So they go down to the military units in the Brian Strauss, and essentially they're taking over the place at this point.
Yeah, because that's what a coup is. A coup is you remove the head of government and you replace that head of government. You take control of the military and you take control of that military.
Yes, sir. And again, I'm glad we pointed out this is what an actual coup looks like. This is documented history.
Right. Not when that leader incites a riot. Okay, that's not what happened in Washington, D.C. A sitting president incited a riot. There was no coup. By no definition was there a coup. This we're looking at was an attempted coup.
Mhm.
It was unsuccessful, but this is what this is how they look. This is how they take place.
Exactly. So next it says at the beer hall, Hess, which is Rudolf Hess, was rounding up enemies of the people as hostages. He stood on a chair in the great hall, calling out names of officials and officers, including Minister President Kneeling, Police President Mantle, and Prince Ruprecht political advisors. They dutifully stepped forward as if they were unruly schoolboys, all except Justice Minister Gertner, who made a break for freedom but was caught. At first, they were incarcerated in a small room upstairs. But then it was decided that Hess should transfer them for safekeeping to a house near the Tegernsee, a lake south of Munich. Others in Hitler's inner circle were off on assignments. Max Amon, the squat but formidable street fighter, led a group to a bank, which he seized for the new government's central offices, while Scoopner Richter, Esser, and Hafstigel were reconnoitering the city streets to check on the progress of the revolution. They found a city of confusion. Many citizens were enthusiastic, others perplexed, and some indignant. Few knew what was going on, including those involved in the action, since conflicting orders kept emanating from the Burger Brawl. The man principally responsible for the first successes of the putsch was Frick of the Munich Police Presidium. He persuaded his colleagues on duty not to launch any counterattacks against the putsch, then hovered near a phone to calm bewildered police officials who called in for information. His advice always was to wait and do nothing. Because of this state of inaction, his former chief, the disposed police president Pollner, was able to walk into police headquarters and, without any show of force, take charge. His first act was to make arrangements for a press conference with the leading non-Marxist newspapers. At the Burger Brockheller, Hitler was in a state of euphoria with the police under control and district headquarters occupied by Rom. Then came a report from the engineer barracks. The Putsches were having an argument with the engineers. Hitler made a snap decision to leave his command post to straighten out the matter in person. It was a grave tactical error, followed by a second, placing General Ludendorff in charge. No sooner had Hitler left the building than General von Lossow said he had to go to his office and issue orders. This seemed reasonable to Ludendorff, who allowed Lossow to march out of the beer hall with Carr and Sesser not far behind. Hitler did no good at the engineer barracks, being turned away at the gate. He returned half an hour later and was appalled to find that the triumvirate had been allowed to escape. He assailed Ludendorff. How could he have done such a thing? Now Lossow could sabotage the revolution. The general looked frostily down his nose at the former corporal. A German officer, he said, would never break an oath. So, already we are seeing damage to the armor. So, like the author stated, the first tactical mistake was Hitler leaving the beer hall in order to go to the engineer barracks. And then his second mistake, letting Ludendorff be in charge of the hostages.
Absolutely. Again, as a man who was never an officer in the military, had no career in the military other than being a foot soldier during the war, never went to the war college, he never understood about lines of communication and delegating responsibility and using subordinates to carry out your orders, and also maintaining effective command and control. None of these things he learned, and they came back to bite him in the backside, because now you effectively left someone who was not a true believer in your cause, and you left him in charge. And what did he do? He promptly let the triumvirate escape, who he was basically holding, no, not basically, literally holding captive.
Right. And then when Hitler comes back and he's like, how could you do this and everything? Ludendorff is like, why? Who do you think I am? Pretty much telling him that, look, you're just a former corporal person, corporal officer, even at that. I am of high ranking. Like, do I really need to listen to you? Is what Ludendorff's reply was.
And again, he was never fully sold on the idea of this coup. He went along with it, but he was never fully sold. And again, this is something that would haunt and plague Hitler the rest of his life. Never understanding military tactics, not understanding the importance of having generals and admirals around you, military advisors, and listening to them and taking their advice. But again, every aspect of his life, his upbringing, every step, everywhere, every failure in his life compounded, and it compounded, and it compounded, and it compounded, until just because you can manipulate people and manipulate the public and control emotions and hearts and minds does not make up for your gross character failings. But again, what do I know? I'm just a simple man trying to make his way in the galaxy.
Likewise, good sir. Nexus says Hitler's spirits were raised at 11 p.m. by the arrival of 1,000-man military unit. It was almost the entire complement of the infantry school, an elite group of cadets. Except for a handful of dissidents, they had been persuaded to join the uprising en masse by Lieutenant Gerhard Rosbach, a veteran of the Free Corps movement. The cadets had placed their own commander under house arrest and accepted the flamboyant Rosbach, like Rom, a homosexual and gallant fighter, as their new leader. To the blare of a brass band, the cadets marched smartly up to the beer hall, wearing swastika armbands and carrying National Socialist flags. Standing at attention, former quartermaster General Ludendorff and ex-corporal Hitler reviewed them. Then the cadets marched off to occupy the offices of Commissar von Kahr, while the leaders of the putsch set off in their cars for military district headquarters. At Rom's command post, the office of General von Lossow, the group began discussing the future course of the revolution. Ensconcing himself in an easy chair, Ludendorff demanded that someone get a hold of Lossow or Caesar on the phone. A number of calls were made, but neither could be reached. Scoopner Richter expressed the feeling that something was wrong. Lossow had said he was coming here to his own office. Where was he? And where were Carr and Caesar? Ludendorff again protested that these three gentlemen had given their oath in full view and sound of thousands. They could not possibly have changed their minds. Major Max Squander, an officer on the staff of the commander of army units in Bavaria, was just entering the building. He had heard rumors of a putsch and sought out the duty officer, who could only say that the affair was extremely unclean and fishy. While we spoke, recalled Squadner, Captain Rom stormed into the room in full uniform of the old army with all his medals and asked for General von Lossow. I immediately told Rom that this putsch was in clear violation of yesterday's understanding with von Lossow. Rom replied in a voice vibrant with sincerity that everything was all right. Von Lossow, Carr, and von Caesar had all declared themselves in accord with everything and would soon come to Hitler in the military district headquarters. I said only that was something different. After Rom left, the duty officer motioned to Squadner and whispered, "The affair is crooked." Lossow, he said, was with Caesar and the commander of the Bavarian army at the 19th Infantry Barracks and would definitely not come here. A little later, a call came through the still unmonitored switchboard. It was from Lossow at his new command post, safe in the center of the regimental barracks complex. He ordered a counterattack on the putschs he had recently pledged to support. Loyal Army battalions in Augsburg, Ingolstadt, Regensburg, Landshut, and other surrounding localities were to be transported to Munich by rail. Squadner promptly called the transport officer, passed on Lossow's orders, and agreed to phone instructions to half of the battalions himself. The putsch was being planned in one room and sabotage in the one next to it. Finally, just before midnight, it occurred to the plotters to limit the switchboard to putsch's traffic, but by then, all of Lossow's counter orders had been transmitted.
There you go. So, again, this is what a coup looks like. This is also what a failed coup looks like. But again, it does not, and it is not, and it was not what happened January 6th in Washington, D.C. Now, moving past that, once again here we see Hitler's failing to understand military tactics, to understand anything military at all, because he was only a foot soldier with poor fitness ratings and was just drummed out of the army as soon as the war was over. So he did not understand command and control, delegation, authority, and mistake after mistake after mistake. It's interesting to me to see that the same mistakes that led to his failure here during the beer hall putsch followed him after his success in 1932, and what ultimately led Germany to lose the war.
Right. And that's what kind of gets me too is when you look at the details of what happened here at the beer hall pooch, the mere fact that you let the hostages go, it,
I
it,
mean, to me, that's something you see in a comedy. In a comedy,
mhm.
it's like you leave the big 400-pound dummy to watch the captives, and while you go away, they talk to him and convince him, hey, aren't you hungry? You don't want to sit here and watch us. And he says, yeah, I am kind of hungry, and then he goes off to get something to eat, and then they just escape. I mean, this is comedy. It's pure comedy.
It really is because I like you said, you would think Hitler would learn from this failure, and I mean, there's still going to be some errors that happened during the beer hall pooch that almost cost him his life. But again, a lot of what happened during this event, you would think Hitler would have learned from it, but it's like once he took power and really started to gain control over all of Germany, all of those learnings from past mistakes just went out the window,
You
as
know,
if it never happened in his mind.
it's funny. The only mistakes Hitler seemed to learn from was his ability to manipulate people's emotions and
Hmm.
minds. He didn't learn from any of his other mistakes. That's fascinating to me.
Exactly. So Nexus says, despite the marching troops, the bands, and the excitement, most Munich mutineers, most mutineers had no idea revolution once more had come to their city. One of the Fuhrer's closest friends, Heinrich Hoffmann, spent the evening in the Fledermausbar without learning that anything out of the ordinary had taken place. And only at midnight did he discover that the revolution was on. By the time jubilant gangs of young people were keeping guests in downtown hotels awake with their songs and cries of triumph. At the American consulate, Robert Murphy, the acting consul, was composing a telegram to the Secretary of State. According to Hitler, task of this government is to march on Berlin, wage 12-hour fight, asserted that the dawn would see either new national government or the death of the speaker. It was a night of terror for those opponents of the coup who were dragged from their homes and held hostage, and for some picked out of the phone book if their names sounded Jewish, who was who were corralled by the brown shirts. One unit descended on the socialist Munich posts, but while it was smashing the presses, orders came from the irate Hitler to desist since he wanted the plant for his own purposes. At military district headquarters, it was becoming increasingly evident that the triumvirate had broken their word. No one seemed to recall that it had been made under duress, and that events were getting out of hand. Scoopner Reichert and his servant Agner left to bring back Caesar, but could not locate him. On their return, they found a somewhat depressed Hitler. Eigner was ordered to take Rosenberg to a printing shop to make copies of the announcement of the new government signed by the principal partners. This done, Rosenberg proceeded to the offices of the Volkischer Beobachter to write an editorial for the morning edition. Entitled Call to the German People, it exhorted the public to hand over President Ebert and other social democrats, dead or alive, to the people's national government. Eitner was already back at military district headquarters, where he was instructed by his employer to go home for champagne and food, and to tell Frau Scoopner Reicher that everything was in order and she should not worry. The situation was deteriorating. Rom had finally become suspicious of what was going on in the next room and arrested the duty officer. He also issued orders to seize all other army officers in the building, but not in time to catch the enterprising Major Squadner, who had accomplished his mission of summoning troops to Munich. Warned by a civilian employee, he slipped out just before the cordon was drawn. Things were also not going well for the Pooches at the headquarters of Commissar von Kahr. He had gone there after his escape from the beer hall to find that machinery had already been set in motion to crush the Pooch. Understandably, he did nothing to stop these measures. He had just received an indignant message from Prince Ruprecht. Crush this movement at any cost. Use troops if necessary. And was helping direct the defense of his building against the lively threat of Lieutenant Rossbach, and his 1,000 cadets from the infantry school. It should have been easy for the revolutionists to carry out Ludendorff's order to take the building, whatever the cost, and it would have been an important victory. But it turned into a standoff with cadets and police facing each other at bayonet points, each group waiting for the other to fire the first shot. No one wanted bloodshed. The cadets had no wish to fire at men in uniform, and many of the police shared the young man's faith in Hitler. Negotiations went on interminably until the man of action, Rossbach, became impatient and shouted to his cadets, "What? Still negotiating here? You know General Ludendorff's orders. Why the hesitation? Order your men to fire." At last, the cadets moved into position with skirmishers advancing in a semicircle, followed by machine gun crews. The police countered by inviting 3 rebels inside to discuss the matter. They accepted the invitation, but with the understanding that if they did not appear in 10 minutes, the attack would begin. The minutes passed, and just as the cadets prepared themselves for action, a command rang out. Companies, withdraw. The cadets pulled back. The siege was over. The battle that might have swung the decision was lost by default, primarily because Hitler forces were reluctant to fire upon men they wanted as allies. All the cadets had done was keep Commissar von Kahr bottled up for several crucial hours. Now he left the building and joined Losau and Caesar at the 19th Infantry Barracks. The faint hope held at military district headquarters that the Triumvirate would not act overtly against the Putsch faded when it was learned that General von Losau had sent out this message to all German wireless stations at 2:55 a.m. The message read, "State Commissar General von Kahr, Colonel von Caesar, and General von Losau repudiated the Hitler Putsch. Expressions of support extracted by gunpoint invalid. Caution is urged against misuse of the above names."
And
Signed.
that right there is a nail in the coffin.
Yep. Signed by von Losau. So, oh my goodness. I can't wait when we get into depths of a lot of these coups that happen not just in Germany, but in other countries as well. But this here, pretty much once the message was wired to all the German stations and it was signed off by Losau, pretty much the coup was done.
Because, in order for a coup to be effective, you have to have the military on your side, or you have to have enough military brass that they are going to take effective control of the military. So, again, you have the military on your side. Unless it's a military coup, and in a military coup, the military replaces the leader of the government, and then they take control of the country. So again, what are we seeing? More things that did not happen in Washington, D.C. in January. But again, this is textbook of how a lot of coups fail. a
Mm-hmm.
breakdown in command and control. They did not have the military on their side, and it falls apart. And the funny thing is, most political coups fail if you ever study them.
Right. And for the people listening out there, the main reason why the incident on January 6th is not considered a coup, just keep this in mind. Not a single military unit was involved. Therefore, by definition, it can't be considered a coup or even an attempted coup.
Exactly. The purpose of a coup is to remove the head of state and change government. The head of state incited a riot. He then
Mm-hmm.
removed himself and watched the whole thing happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that happened. It was a riot. But again, if you repeat a lie often enough, people believe the lie. But that was not a coup. This was a coup, a failed coup, but this was a coup.
Mm-hmm. They almost got the military on their side, but it failed. Therefore, this goes down in history as an attempted coup. And I just find it interesting that one other lie that is mentioned is how January 6th is considered the day democracy was almost lost.
Yeah, that oh my God. All I'll say is this: if you repeat the lie often enough, people will believe it. That's all I have to say. That is such
Yeah.
an absolute joke. It just goes to show how mush people's brains are. But moving
Oh
on,
yeah.
just getting out of there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Moving right along. Nexus says at the 19th Infantry Regiment, Carr, hunch and brooding in a SETI, was being called upon to write a proclamation to be posted throughout the city. He finally composed one that satisfied everyone. Deception, he said, had turned a demonstration for Germany's awakening into sickening violence. Had the senseless and purposeless attempt to revolt succeeded, Germany would have been plunged into the abyss and Bavaria with it. He dissolved the NSDAP and other right wing organizations, declaring that those responsible for the putsch would ruthlessly be made to suffer the punishment they deserve. It had been a long and bitter evening for the Commissar. It was not until 5 a.m. that confirmation of the repudiation of the putsch by the triumvirate reached military district headquarters. The informant was the disposed commandant of the infantry school. He regretfully informed Hitler that the triumvirate did not feel honor bound to their oaths since they were made at pistol point. General von Lossow was going to put down the putsch with force. If Hitler was stunned, he did not show it. He made a long speech to his fellow conspirators, ending with the declaration that, if need be, he was determined to fight and die for his cause. With Ludendorff's concurrence, he ordered Scoopner Reichter and his servant, who had returned with the champagne and refreshments, to find their own newly designated minister-president and order him to seize the police headquarters with an Oberlin unit. Poner set off on his mission with gusto and was so confident that he walked into the police directory with a single companion. He was escorted to the office of the major in charge, and to his consternation, it came like a blow from a club. He was arrested. His former assistant, Frick, was already in custody. By this time, Hitler, Ludendorff, and the staff were on their way back to the beer hall, leaving Röhm and his followers to hold the military district building. Dismayed as he was, Hitler had not yet given up. If we get through, very well, he remarked grimly. If not, we'll have to hang ourselves. It was still dark as word went out to those pooches not manning strongholds to assemble at the beer hall. A wet, chilling snow was falling as units converged on the burger brawl. The man had the impression that something had gone wrong, but knew no details. Even so, they proceeded through the empty streets, flags flying, with at least one group of SA men lustily singing Eckert's Sturmlied, Germany Awake, Break Your Chains in Two. We are now in section 2 of chapter 6. It was a dull, overcast dawn with a biting damp chill. The cold, wet snow continued to fall spasmodically. The rank and file of pooches were gathered glumly in the smoke-filled, dank main hall of the Burger Bra Keller. Unshaven and unwashed, they were eating a breakfast of coffee, cheese, and bread. The excitement and exultation of last night had evaporated. Then someone announced that the triumvirate had publicly denounced the revolution, and the army would not participate. Someone else mounted the speaker's platform, reached a scene of such high drama, and began raging against all the traitors, the bourgeois, and the generals. March to Berlin, he shouted. There was some applause, but the suggestion struck Hitler's lawyer, Hans Frank, as highly romantic and very unpolitical. The leaders were in a private room upstairs, where Ludendorff sat stony-faced and frightening in his unperturbed calm. As he sipped red wine for breakfast. In his old tweed shooting jacket, he was still an impressive figure, but his show of confidence cracked upon getting the information that Losau had publicly denounced the new government. I will never gain the trust, the word of a German officer, he exclaimed, and retreated into glum silence. The coup, which had seemed so successful at midnight, was unraveling in the cold light of day, and Hitler's next step revealed his desperation. He ordered a Battle League unit to seize the police station and rescue the incarcerated Poner, continuing to act as if there was still hope. He then sent a detachment of stormtroopers to the Jewish printing firm of Parkus to confiscate stacks of freshly printed inflation money. This being Germany, each revolutionist had to be paid his stipend. The sum of 14,605 trillion marks, and in true German fashion, the Parkus brothers demanded and got a receipt. So, keep in mind, folks, by the time the people or these men got their 14,605 trillion marks, it lost its value within seconds.
Yeah, that's crazy. I still can't even wrap my head around that. I mean, just imagine being at the bank. You make a withdrawal, and as the teller is counting your money, every note that she's counting is losing value while you're looking at her counting. I mean, just imagine just drawing a random number. Let's say you just withdraw 2,000 from your account, and as she's counting every 20, or as she's counting every 100, here's 100. As she counts the next one, it's worth 80. As she counts the next one, it's really worth 75. As she counts the next one, it's worth 68. I mean, mind-boggling.
Yeah. Oh boy, yeah, that little excerpt is just kind of like, wow.
Yeah.
You demanded a stipend, but the stipend you was promised 2 hours ago is not even worth half or even a tenth of what it was 2 hours ago.
Which, also bringing us back to something that we were talking in our very last stream. At the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, everyone has lights to keep on, or roof to keep over their head, food to put in their bellies, and clothes to put on their back. If all you have is rhetoric and emotions, no one is going to take you seriously. You have you have to produce something concrete. And if there's no money involved, if there's no actual action involved, no one is going to take you seriously. No one wants to listen to you. So you can talk all you want about code and this, that, and the third, and whatever political action you have, and this mindset. When the rubber meets the road, where's the money? Where's the concrete action? What has been built? What is actually going to take place? What is taking place? Outside of that, you're hot air. And, your emotions and your rhetoric and your political idealism and a blanket is going to keep you warm at night in the cold months.
Hmm. Fun times. Fun times.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nexus says by this time, more Pooch's units were arriving in trucks from outside localities. Wet, freezing, and weary, they knew nothing of the turn of events and were in good spirits. The largest contingent came from Landshut, and halfway to Munich, they had been overtaken by a truckload of state police who exchanged hiles with them. Their leader was the druggist Gregor Strasser. He sat in the cab of the lead vehicle, and as it rumbled along the peaceful but busy streets, someone observed that everyone was going to work as usual. This is no revolution. Something is wrong. We'll see, said Strasser. At the beer hall, he was informed by Captain Goering that those fellows had broken their word to the Fuhrer, but the people were still with him. We're going to try the whole thing over again. Then a short, stocky man with a shining bald pate, it was Julius Streicher, burst into the main hall to harangue the gathering on behalf of Hitler. Gesturing with his whip, he spoke raucously and obscenely in an effort to work up enthusiasm. Arms were passed out to those who had none, and the men were reloaded into trucks and taken to their posts. By this time, the Battle League unit ordered by Hitler to occupy police headquarters was back at the military district building. Mission unaccomplished. They had argued with the police for a few minutes before leaving to avoid a fight. Hitler turned the task of rescuing Pollner over to his faithful bodyguard unit. This hardy group reached the police directory at 9:30 a.m., set up machine guns to cover the building, and made as if to attack. But again, the rebels had no stomach for shedding blood. They returned to the beer hall, mission still unaccomplished, only to be dispatched minutes later on an easier task: arrests of the Marxist city councilors who had refused to fly the swastika flag over the city hall. They forced their way into the old Rathaus. Their commander, the tobacconist, flung open the door of the council room. Cocking his weapon, he shouted that all the Social Democrats and Communists were under arrest. Outside the Marienplatz, according to his account, a large crowd greeted the appearance of the councilors with jeers and insults. As a matter of fact, it was we troopers who had to defend them from the onslaught of the people. Otherwise, actual fatalities might have occurred. It was quite a job getting them safely loaded into the lorries. As these trucks started for the beer hall, Pooch's speakers began haranguing a crowd which grew so dense that the number 6 trolley cars bound for Sindling were unable to move. The main speaker was Streicher. Streicher. who proved to be a greater attraction than the famous revolving figures of the Rotha's clock. By now, the Platz was festooned with swastika banners, and the party flag waved from the top of the city hall. The putsch was marked by confusion and hesitation on both sides. In some parts of the city, excuse me, the municipal police were pulling down putsch's posters and arresting rebels, while in the inner city, rebels were arresting the police for attempting to put up government posters repudiating the putsch and dissolving the NSDAP. Excuse me. Hitler's men held most of the major downtown bridges over the Isar River, including the most important, Ludwig Brock, connecting the beer hall with the center of the city. At the museum bridge, citizens were chiding the youthful putschs. Do you have your mother's permission to play with such dangerous things in the streets? Called out one worker. The little 10-man detachment returned sheepishly to the beer hall. At another Isar bridge, rumors were spreading among the men from Landshut that something had gone wrong and that betrayal was in the cards. Their fears were justified. At 10 a.m., trucks loaded with men in green uniforms arrived. These were the state troopers, who hurriedly set up 2 heavy machine guns. The putschs did nothing since their orders were to hold fire. The state police also had orders to stand up in place, and the two sides simply stared at each other. At the beer hall, the rebel leaders were in dispute. Colonel Hermann Kreibel, who had served in the war on Ludendorff's staff, wanted to withdraw to Rosenheim on the Austrian border, where they might win over the local right radicals. Göring seconded this. It was his hometown, and he assured everyone it was strongly pro-Hitler. Here, they could assemble reinforcements and regroup. The movement cannot end in the ditch of some obscure country lane, was Ludendorff's sarcastic retort. It was up to Hitler. He hesitated briefly, but he was a born gambler, and the prospect of a lengthy guerrilla campaign was not appealing. He wanted to win or lose on one throw of the dice, and he vetoed the Kreibel plan. So here again, we're seeing that not much is being made for the putschs. On one hand, you have the police coming in and arresting the rebels, telling them that, hey, the putsch is done, nothing's going to happen, go home. Where on other side of the city, the rebels are actually arresting the police and telling them, hey, we're taking over, this is our time to shine, you guys are in the way. Again, much confusion, as you saw with the state troopers coming in and being like, nah, this is not a putsch. Nothing is coming of this. Again, just total confusion on all sides.
You know, the thing that sticks out to me is that this was the thing that sticks out to me is that this template remained the same when Hitler was finally released after serving his jail time, and he rebuilt the Nazi Party, and they won the election in 1932, and all throughout his rebuilding the country, and then all throughout the war, he learned nothing. He learned nothing. He repeated every single one of the same mistakes all along the way. That's the thing that you really learn so much from history, and it's why I personally try to be very observant and learn from my mistakes, and also learn from others' mistakes and their successes, and mine as well, because as the old saying goes, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. And Hitler did not learn, and he kept making the same mistakes over and over and over, and it got to a point it became unsustainable. And a course in the war.
Indeed. And the sad part about it, he still has yet to make even more mistakes in this already doomed pooch. So, Nexus says the discussion dragged on until late morning while the situation on the streets deteriorated. At military district headquarters, Captain Rom and his men were under siege by army and state police troops. While the older members of the Battle League were not all eager to face such overwhelming odds, the 150 men of Rom's own group were ready for combat. Word of the government attack against Rom brought arguments at the Burger Brockler to a halt. It was evident that the Pooches had to act now or surrender ignominiously. According to Ludendorff, it was he who first thought of marching in force into the heart of Munich to rescue Rom. We march, he said. If it was Ludendorff's idea, it was carried out in Hitler fashion, as a propaganda parade, a display of power designed to arouse support for the putsch from the citizenry. We would go to the city, Hitler later testified, to win the people to our side, to see how public opinion would react, and then to see how Karl, Lossow, and Caesar would react to public opinion. After all, those gentlemen would hardly be foolish enough to use machine guns against a general uprising of the people. That's how the march into the city was decided on. Ludendorff was convinced that army troops would not impede the march, and recently had assured a friend, the heavens will fall before the Bavarian Reichswehr turn against me. Hitler was just as confident that neither army nor state police would fire on a war hero like Ludendorff, who would be in the front row. Hitler's decision, the most desperately daring decision of my life, was made, and orders were hurriedly dispatched to units manning the bridges. Outside the beer hall, Colonel Kreibel, the professional soldier, began setting up the line of march. Hitler was just leaving the conference room around 11:30 a.m. as Eckert sauntered in. Once they had been the closest friends. Now Hitler looked very dark and said, "Good day," in a hard voice. Outside, the affronted author received another rebuff when he greeted Ludendorff respectfully. The general gave him an indifferent tip of the hat. The parade formed quickly. There was no band to lead off since the musicians who had reported to the beer hall that morning got neither breakfast nor pay and marched off after playing a dutiful chorus of the Bandenweiler, the march of Hitler's regiment in war. In the van were picked skirmishers and 8 men carrying the swastika and the black, white, red flags. Next came the leaders. Hitler with Scoopner Richter on his right and Ludendorff on his left. Alongside were Colonel Kreibel, personal bodyguard Groff, the commander of the Munich stormtroopers, and Captain Hermann Göring, romantically militant with steel helmet decorated with a large white swastika and wearing a smart black leather coat upon enough so that his pour le moret could be seen. He was somewhat ruffled because his idea to bring along the captured counselors as hostages had been vetoed, but the Führer had courtly rejected the scheme. He wanted no martyrs. Behind the leaders were 3 units marching abreast in columns of 4. On the left was Hitler's 100-man bodyguard, steel helmeted and armed with carbines and potato masher grenades. On the right, the Bonn Oberlin, and in the middle, the battle-seasoned Munich SA Regiment. There followed a motley collection of men, some in uniform or parts tattered World War uniforms, some wearing work clothes or business suits. The cadets from infantry school, smart and ultra military, were sandwiched between students, shopkeepers, middle aged businessmen, and hard faced freebooters. The only common mark was a swastika brassard on the left arm. Most of them had rifles, and many had fixed bayonets. Others, particularly the SA, held pistols in chilled hands. Scoobner Reichner, wearing a pince nez, grabbed Rosenberg's hand and said, "Things look ugly," then gloomily prophesied to Hitler that this would be their last walk together. The Fuhrer himself was pale and grave. Against the bitter cold, he wore his familiar trench coat and carried his slouch hat. Ludendorff overcoat over his hunting jacket was impassive, but he turned and ordered his servant to go home so he wouldn't get hurt. So, as you can see, this was to be the last stand for the pooch. So, all the figureheads for the NSDAP was here, and they was going to try their last stand. And even then, again, without the support of the military, it just was not going to make much of a difference. What are your thoughts, good sir?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really don't have much to add there.
Yes, indeed. So
You know,
next, go right ahead.
it just the thing that one of the things that I think often gets overlooked is the understanding between the government and the military. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, no government can operate or stay in power without the tacit support of the military. Now, I'm not saying that governments exist under the under the under the impending sword of the military, and they have to keep the military happy. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, if you if you want to if you're attempting to change the government forcibly, like in a coup, as I said, you have to have the support of the military, or you have to have military brass who are going to take control of the military, giving you the very same thing, support of the military.
Indeed, indeed. And with pretty much lacking that, well, let's continue to see. It was almost noon when the straggling column moved off. In 15 minutes, the 2,000 men reached the Ludwig Bridge and a small force of state police. The police commander stepped forward at the Pooch's skirmishers, slowly advanced, called out to halt or be fired upon, then turned to his men and told them to load with live ammunition. Excuse me. As he spoke, a bugle blasted, and selected Pooches suddenly converged on the police with bayonets leveled, shouting, "Don't shoot at your comrades." The police hesitated, and before a shot could be fired, were overrun. The column continued across the bridge and marched straight ahead. The Zweibrückenstrasse was lined with people, many cheering enthusiastically and waving swastika flags. Bystanders began joining the parade. This enthusiasm inspired the marchers to song, and without band accompaniment, they broke into their favorite storm song. As they approached the Isartor, where its author Eckert, who had gone on ahead, stood in the crowd near the ancient gate, He located a grim-faced Hitler in the first row. Their eyes met, and he stared at me as if to imply, "So where are you?" The chilled men, their exhalations visible in the cold, continued unimpeded, and in another 15 minutes flowed into the Marienplatz, still festooned with swastika banners from the rallies. The Nazi flag still waved atop the city hall, and a large crowd was swinging patriotic songs. At this point, there was confusion among the marchers. Some were under the impression they were to turn around and return to the beer hall, while others assumed they would continue into the city and rescue Rom. Colonel Kreibel was surprised when Ludendorff led the way to the right into the Weinstrasse and toward the Odeonplatz, but said to himself, "If Ludendorff is marching that way, naturally we'll go with him." The general himself had not planned this move. At certain moments in life, at certain moments in life, one acts instinctively and doesn't know why. We just wanted to get to Rom, and bring him back. The impulsive turn to the right by the heavy-set man in the dark brown overcoat was bringing the Pooches face to face with government forces. In moments, the column approached one of Munich's most revered landmarks, the Feldherrn Hall. Here, a line of city police blocked the way, but the Pooches surged forward, singing, "O Deutschland hoch in Ehren, O Germany high in honor." Looking down from her hotel room, Frau Winifred Wagner was amazed to see her idol, Hitler, marching down the narrow Residenzstrasse, next to Ludendorff. Just ahead in the Odeonsplatz, small groups of green uniformed men were scrambling into a blocking position. There was only room enough in the street for 8 abreast. Hitler locked arms with Schuppner-Reichner in preparation for trouble, but Ludendorff touched no one, still supremely confident that no one would fire on him. Directly ahead was a cordon of state police under First Lieutenant Michael Freiherr von Golden. Faced with an oncoming mob, Golden called out, "Second company, set double time, march." The state police jogged forward, but the Pooches did not break, standing off the enemy with level bayonets and pistols. Golden used his rifle to parry 2 bayonet thrusts, overturning the man behind him with rifle at high port. All at once, a shot exploded. Golden heard it zing past his head. It killed a sergeant. For a fraction of a second, my company stood frozen. Then, before I could give an order, my people opened fire, with the effect of a salvo. The Pooches returned fire, and panic broke out as marchers and bystanders scrambled for safety. One of the first to fall was Schuppner-Reichner, shot in the lungs. Another was Groff, who had leaped in front of Hitler to take the half-dozen bullets meant for him. In falling, the personal bodyguard clutched Hitler, yanking him down so sharply that his left arm was dislocated. On the side of Schuppner-Reichner also helped drag Hitler to the pavement. Ludendorff's faithful servant, who had been ordered to go home, was bleeding on the asphalt. His friend Eigner, servant of the dying Schuppner-Reichner, crawled to him. He was dead. Someone stepped over Eigner. It was General Ludendorff marching erectly, left hand and coat, pocket in line of fire. As Hitler sprawled on the ground, thinking he had been shot in the left side, comrades tried to shield him, Hit 18 men lay dead in the street, 14 followers of Hitler, and 4 state police, all incidentally more or less sympathetic with National Socialism. Those in front of the marching column only knew what had happened. The crowd jammed up behind only heard firecrackers explosions ahead. Then a rumor that both Hitler and Ludendorff were killed. The putschs scrambled to the rear. Ludendorff marched through the police cordon and into the arms of a lieutenant who placed him under arrest and escorted him to the residence. Once inside, the man who moments before had acted like a hero in fiction began behaving like a spoiled child. He petulantly refused an offer by a police colonel to inform his family of his safety and forbade the colonel to call him Excellency. From now on, he was Herr Ludendorff, and he would never don uniform as long as the offending police officer wore one. Hitler struggled painfully to his feet, cradling his injured arm. He was in agony as he slowly moved away from the battleground, face pale, hair falling over his face. He was accompanied by Dr. Walter Schultz, chief of the Munich SA Medical Corps, a towering young man. They came upon a small boy lying at the curb, bleeding profusely. Hitler wanted to carry him off, but Schultz called to his wife's cousin, a botany student named Schutzer, to take the boy. At Max Joseph's Platz, they finally reached Hitler's old gray cell, which had been loaded with medical supplies. An elderly first aid man named Frankel got in the front seat with the driver, while Hitler and the doctor got into the rear seat. Schutzer stood on the running board holding the wounded boy. Hitler told the driver to head for the Burger Bra-Keller so he could find out what was going on. But at the Marienplatz, they came under heavy machine gun fire and had to change directions several times. They found the Ludwig Bridge blocked and turned back. By this time, the boy had regained consciousness, and Schutzer dismounted so he could take the youngster home. The car continued forward, the Sindling Tor Splatz. Here they encountered another burst of fire under the old Southern military, near the old Southern military. Since it was impossible to get back to the beer hall, there was nothing to do but keep driving south towards Salzburg. Goering's display of his Pour le Mérite decoration had not saved him, and he lay on the pavement with a bullet in his upper thigh. Frau Aus Ballen, who had rushed from her home to help the wounded, found him bleeding profusely. With the help of her sister, she dragged the heavy burden indoors. The sister dressed Goering's wound and were about to summon an ambulance when he weakly asked them to help him get to a private clinic. He could not bear the indignity of an arrest. Frau Ballen, his wife of Jewish merchant, had pity on him, and thus he escaped prison. Wow, a lot going on in those sections. Pretty much a lot of damage to Hitler's psyche too, at that.
Yeah, Hitler, the man who went into that jail cell. In a lot of ways, was a different man who came out. But in the most important ways, he wasn't. And the problem is the ways that he wasn't, they stayed with him and they plagued him. It's almost like instead of instead of there being real personal growth and insight, it it was more a case of, hmm, okay, I didn't get this right, but I'll do this instead, or I didn't get this, all right, this this scheme and this plan failed, but I'll tweak this and I'll do that differently to make sure that this scheme uh, um, succeeds when I get out. You follow me? Like he didn't he didn't, for lack of a better term, he did not learn the error of his ways or
Mm-mm.
be introspective or take any personal growth. It was a case of, hmm, okay, you may have won this round, but I'm going to win the next one, buddy.
Painfully speaking, yes. That's Hitler for you. Even when there were dead bodies all around, the man pretty much saw this as an opportunity to make himself seem like a hero. And I can't wait when we get to the court scene for his trial, because that's when you're going to see Hitler in, with all odds against him, somehow make it out of nothing to make all the people there just seem like, wow, this man really was a hero.
It's funny how that works, right?
Oh yeah. And believe me, he's just getting started, folks. Like, we still got another two sections before we get to the next chapter.
You know,
Where,
um,
oh, go right ahead.
the whole thing about, again, for him, it was like, okay, you won this round, buddy, but I'm going to win the next one. Case in point, he gets out, rebuilds the Nazi Party, wins the election, spends years rebuilding Germany from top to bottom. Um, Regardless of what people feel about the man and what they have to say, he rebuilt the country, infrastructure, socially, top to bottom. He
Hmm.
goes to Admiral Rader and says, listen, this is what I want to do. I want to wage war. I want to expand. What do you need? Admiral Rader says, I like your plan. I like your ships, Plan H, everything. I need 5 more years to build you the navy that I need to fight the war you want me to fight. Hitler said, you have my word. You will get your 5 years. 6 weeks later, 6 weeks later, he's rolling a ship into Poland, into Danzig, and starts the war. So
Ah,
didn't learn, did not learn.
no, sir, he did not. And oh my goodness, I can't wait till we break all of this down beforehand. Because keep in mind, while he's in prison, it was during this time that he makes his book, Mein Kampf, which in German translates to My Struggle.
Actually, that's a mistranslation. Mein
Oh,
Kampf means my fight.
ah, good point, good point. And even then, like, when his foot first gets out, not many people take it seriously because it's still during this time that, you know, Germany was kind of, as they say, rolling high and everything was starting to turn for the better. There were replans for the reparations that kind of favored Germany and were kind of lax a bit, and they were getting foreign loans, especially from America at this time. When we get into this era, Germany was really on the high level. But then that fateful day in October, that's when we're going to see many things turn on its heel. And boy, I can't wait till we talk about that day.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I have to. Unfortunately, my memory's a little hazy. Was it the Lutzow? Was that the ship that sailed into the harbor that day? I'm not sure. I think it was the Lutzow. I don't quote me. I'm hazy at the moment. I'm drawing a blank.
I want to say it was the Lucille, and definitely when we get closer to the invasion of Poland, we'll definitely find out for sure which was that ship that came in and started to bombard the shores of Poland. But indeed, just the mere fact that he told Admiral Raider that, yeah, your 5 year plan, we're going to get it going. We're going to follow suit. You have my word. This is solid, and we're really going to make it happen. Only within 6 weeks, just completely turn it upside down.
And the funny the funny thing is, on paper, it looks like a good plan. I mean, Hitler wanted to build battleships the same size as aircraft carriers,
Mm-hmm.
massive 20-inch guns. I mean, guns that were like land-based size guns on warships. Just a massive navy.
Mm-hmm.
Aircraft carriers that would have been like the same size as a modern day Nimitz size carrier. Just massive, massive navy. Excuse me. And the sheer amount of numbers and the destroyers and the submarines. Excuse me. So again, it's just he never learned these lessons. And coming back to when Hitler was asked what was his plan about the beer hall putsch, and he said he didn't have a real plan, but you know what? He was just going to wing it, and let's see how the night turns out.
Yeah.
It's like he did the very same thing when he tells Admiral Rader, "You need 5 years to build the navy you need. I'm giving you your 5 years." 6 weeks later, he picks up the phone and says, "Prepare for war."
I can only imagine Admiral Rader's expression when Hitler told him we're going to war. It was like, definitely we don't want to jump the gun just yet, because when we build up to that point, we're really going to see the madman in action. That's really all I can tell you.
Yeah, that's very good. That's about right, for sure.
I mean, you really can't describe it in any other way or form, because for this man to literally, you give your word to your best military officer, telling him that, look, the plan we have, or excuse me, the plan you have is solid. The This is going to make Germany the eye of Europe. It is going to be this grand, the grand face of all of Europe plus more, only for it to be sullied within 6 weeks.
And the thing is this: listen, ultimately, we don't know, and we will never know because Planet H never got built. But
True.
the navy that he had at the time, the Kriegsmarine, the ships, again, interestingly enough, the ships were in individually they were superior fighting ships, but they were not built in the numbers that Admiral Rader needed. Remember, Admiral Rader was a veteran of World War One. He was a veteran of the Battle of Jutland, so he knows and he saw firsthand the effect of German naval power. But he also understood that, coming out of the war, they had to rebuild the Navy. But the thing is this, right? So Hitler surrounded himself with sycophants.
Oh
So
yeah.
going back to, staying here in the 1920s, any person who was an academician or a person of clear rational thinking who could spot him for the fraud that he was, for the intellectual fraud that he was, he did not want that person around him. Or he did
Mm-mm.
everything to isolate that person and remove them from his inner circle. And he did the same thing in the military because he did not listen to Admiral Rader, but he listened to Hermann Goering. Goering may
Mm-hmm.
have been a World War I fighter ace. Yes, he flew under the Red Baron, took over the squadron when the Red Baron was shot down and killed. Fair enough. But guess where else Goering never went to? The War College.
Nope.
Guess what he never did? He never continued his career because he literally got in a plane and flew off and left to Germany. But he did listen to generals who were sycophants. Now he liked Rommel. Rommel was the best general in the entire German army, so he had to
Mm-hmm.
listen to him, and he liked him. But the command staff, he listened to them like they were all sycophants. Admiral Rader was not a sycophant, but he was the commanding officer of the Kriegsmarine, so he had to listen to him. But after a certain point in time, he stopped listening to him too, and basically forced him out. And another popular misconception: Admiral Rader was not a Nazi, not in the true sense. He
Mm-hmm.
was a command officer. He was the chief of naval operations. So you had to join. You were not legally required to join the Nazi Party, but it was very clearly understood. If you did not join the Nazi Party, you could expect a visit from the Gestapo in the middle of the night and you'd never get seen again.
Mm-hmm.
So the entire officer corps, they joined the Nazi Party, but a lot of them were not Nazis and they were not supporters, but they were patriots and they were soldiers and they did their duty.
Right. Oh boy, we we definitely are. It's definitely going to be built up today, and when we get into the military buildup for Nazi Germany, it is definitely going to be a sight to see. But it's also is going to spell its doom when they invaded Poland, excuse me, because it was ill timed. It was planned on a whim, as we see here with the beer hall pooch, and essentially it just was so many mistakes, one after another, that really it was almost as if once Germany was built up, got back on his feet, and was starting to become, you know, seen pretty good in most nations' eyes at the time. It's just once they made those crucial mistakes and really did not put itself in prime position to build itself back up, you you're definitely going to see how fast the Third Reich fell, and it is very interesting how fast it fell.
You know, the funny thing is, right? A lot of people don't know the number of assassination attempts against Hitler in the last year of the war, in the
Oh
last
yeah.
12 months of the war. The most famous, of course, being Operation Valkyrie. But
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of assassination attempts against Hitler, and most of them came from the military. So
Yeah.
that says a lot. Now, one could say, well, there were rats trying to jump over a sinking ship. Fair enough. Fair enough. It's human nature. I'm sure a lot were, and some just went along because you gotta go along. He's in charge. But the fact remains. Well over literally 20 or 30, if I'm correct, documented assassination attempts against Hitler's life, and they came from the military.
Oh yeah, I
And
think it came north of 26 as far as assassination attempts.
mhm. and Operation Valkyrie, it included several generals, and the plan almost succeeded. That was of all the assassination attempts, that was the closest, literally the closest.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was, and definitely can't wait to get more in depths of those attempts and how Hitler just masterfully evaded them all. Keyword masterfully. Because really, that operation should have ended it all there. But for him to have escaped that attempt, I mean, I'm not one to say things as far as pure luck, but if there ever was such thing as pure luck, it was that moment.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't ask for more luck. I mean, they placed a bomb like 2 feet away from him, a bomb,
2 feet.
but a concrete table, a thick, heavy concrete table with all of the windows open. So the concussive force outside the windows, the concrete table took the brunt of the blast. Other than a few cuts, scrapes, and bruises, he was fine. Go figure the dumb luck.
Oh boy, sir, literally cannot wait till we get into depths of that. But with that said, closing thoughts. What are your thoughts up to this point?
Adolf Hitler, like Winston Churchill, is a study in different facets of the life. And Joseph Stalin, how along the way, how along the way, the 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 man who he would become in life and later in power, how it changed throughout the way. None of these men were born; they were made along the way. And it's funny how Stalin learned from a lot of his lessons. Hitler did not. Il Duce, Mussolini, he learned a lot from his lessons. With some, he didn't. And it's funny how between Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini, the two that learned the least ended up losing the war. I mean, I really can't put it any simpler than that. And you know how I loathe making things simple.
Very true. I mean, sad to say, but out of those three, Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin, it really it really showed that the ones who did not heed the warnings, and yet the one who did heed the warnings, in the essence of Stalin, it really changed the output of World War II. And it really showed the lessons of had things could have changed by just a difference of opinion, how different history could have been.
There is another guy, and I keep forgetting I keep forgetting to send you the link to his podcast. This is so another guy, but he used to teach at the Naval War College,
Mm,
and he was a consultant for the DoD and worked on numerous projects. This is separate from the other guy who I mentioned at the top of tonight's stream. But
mm,
I asked him one day. I said, "So, what do you think, in your professional opinion, would have happened had Hitler given Admiral Raeder his 5 years to build the navy that he wanted to build Plan H?" And he thought about it, and he said, "It's funny that I asked him that because that's not a question that he gets asked very often. But looking at the plan that he had on paper, it would have been the most impressive navy in the history of the planet. However, what ultimately won the war was America's industrial might
mm-hmm.
and America constantly rotating submarine captains and surface combatant captains and pilots back to the rear to train new officers and new pilots. And America's industrial might. Those two things combined, that's what ultimately won the war. So even had Germany had the war machine that Admiral Raeder wanted to that Hitler wanted, that Admiral Raeder wanted, he said it would have been only a matter of time. Because there were some people, now again, it's an interesting debate because some would say that there would have been more U-boats and more battleships like the Scharnhorst and the Bismarck and the Tirpitz and the Große Kurfürst to cut off merchant shipping to supply Britain and would have cut off um, American warships coming across to fight in the North Atlantic. But again, we don't know. It's conjecture, but his thinking was that fine, but with American industrial might, America would have had the numbers, and he thinks it would have been only a matter of time. Instead of the war ending in 45, well, 5 years, it would have started in 45, but same difference. He feels that, his opinion was that the industrial might would have won out eventually. So,
Mm.
again, that's only one viewpoint. I'm not saying I necessarily share it, but it's interesting to think about, is my point. What are your
Very
thoughts?
true.
What are your thoughts? Because again, I don't necessarily support it. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I think it's worth discussing.
Well, it's interesting how he said this gentleman's thoughts of yes, had they given Plan H much time to be built and be executed, and that even with that type of buildup and being able to at least be fully prepared to go to war on a full scale, that eventually America's industrial might still would have still would have overthrown it. To me, it sound very similar to what the eventual commander of the Imperial Japanese fleet,
Mm,
Isoroku Yamamoto, and his prophetic words that he told his leaders when they asked him what was his thoughts if Japan went to full war against America, and he told them that, and I can't wait when we talk about it, but he essentially told them within the first 6 months, I will be able to run wild, I will be able to create many victories, and we will essentially be able to make a name for ourselves within those first 6 months. However, if we do not make any substantial gains within those first 6 months, I guarantee nothing from that point forward.
Yep.
Little did he know those words were truly prophetic.
Absolutely, because the United States built 24 aircraft carriers during the war.
Hmm.
24. The Brooklyn Navy Yard, the New Jersey Navy Yard, the Philly Navy Yard, they ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nonstop for years, literally.
Hmm.
Total vertical integration. Raw steel arrived at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. They had a steel mill on site. They built the sheet metal. They built the electronics. They had a shop. They built the guns. The only things not built at the Brooklyn Navy Yard were the boilers and the ordnance. That's it.
Hmm.
Total vertical integration. To build 24 aircraft carriers in 3.5 years, that's insane. And
Right.
Yamamoto had been to America. What remind me if I'm wrong, was before or after World War One? And he said the industrial might, if America was to wake up, we can't win this war.
Yeah. It was after World War One when he spent time studying at Harvard and then had spent 2 years as a naval attaché within the United States Navy. He had a chance to really see the potential of America's industrial might pretty much hand over foot. And that's why he was able to, without thinking it, make that prediction that, yeah, you know, if we do go to war, yeah, the first 6 months, we will definitely do some heavy damage, which they did. But after that, if that damage did not, essentially, if that damage did not at least make America, you know, take the Japanese seriously, and things could have worked out in different matters within those first 6 months. Izuroku was pretty simple. If nothing happened after that, then there was no guarantee.
Yeah, you know. Again, these hypothetical conversations are of interest. Granted,
Mm,
so I have to again cycle back to what's going on in Ukraine because at the end of the day, I'm not there. I don't know what's going on. We only have to go on with what the media shows us or what we see on social media. So, but what we are seeing is we are seeing helicopters, Russian helicopters getting shot out of the air. What we are seeing is Russian soldiers being taken as POWs. What we are seeing is tanks being blown up. We're seeing columns stopped in their tracks. We're seeing vehicles three abreast in a column. I mean, that
mm,
literally does not happen. There's a reason why you move single file.
true.
And we're seeing the military getting stopped left, front, and center. Yes, we're seeing shelling. Yes, we're seeing dump bombs, and we're seeing munitions fired from a distance. But all I'm saying is, I'm not there. Don't know what's going on. Hypothetical conversation, granted, but from what I'm seeing, it's not looking too good, man. Right now, I'm seeing a paper tiger. Any person can tell me the argument about the Spetsnaz, who are on absolutely the same level as the SEALs and the Force Recon and British SAS, but Spetsnaz is special forces. That's not mainline military. And what we're seeing from mainline military, it's not looking good at all.
Indeed. And definitely, for sure, I will definitely be watching closely of what goes on, as they say, right across the pond,
Mhm.
and what goes on within, Eastern Europe in regards to the conflict. So, it's definitely something that, as children of history, as I like to coin it, I'm definitely going to be curious to see what unfolds based on these new information, particularly at the top of the stream, and
Yeah,
being able to see what manifests if things were to go in that direction for sure.
yeah. I
And
mean,
oh no, go right ahead.
no, well, yeah. I'm just saying again. I, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an opinion. I am neutral. I don't know. All I'm saying is I can only go by what I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing so far does not look good. And again, I'm going to send you the link. But again, this guy who has a podcast, he's a former Navy fighter pilot. He taught at the War College. He taught at Annapolis. Annapolis. He gave a very insightful breakdown, and what he had to say, again, it bears a lot of thought, and it also exposed a lot of information that has been verified and corroborated by POWs caught on the ground, Russian officers and Russian soldiers. So either these POWs are lying or what they're saying. Again, we can only go by what they're saying. And what they're saying seems to be corroborated by what we are seeing. And that's so far a paper tiger. That's all
Indeed.
that's all that I'm saying.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. And like I said, definitely it's going to be interesting to watch for sure. As far as within the next 3 months going into the summer, as far as what 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 could happen once things truly heats up. You know, as they say, once the sun gets into its peak in June and all. It's interesting how, once things kind of get towards the middle of the year, uh, particularly for a lot of things in history, how things could things tend to be like a tipping point during that time frame. I just find it interesting is usually around that time when you look at major events that goes on that once things kind of starts to heat up during that time frame, then we really start to see, okay, where is the true manifesto? Where can we
Mm,
really kind of, as they say, halftime in a football game? Then can we kind of see what direction could the game possibly go at that? So it's definitely going to be interesting for sure. I
mm.
at the very least. So
Yeah, I don't like we talked about off air a week or so ago. You myself, SKC, Kid, as I said, there are a lot of moving parts here. There's still a lot of things here we just don't know or we're not seeing. There's definitely, in my opinion, I just feel, and maybe I'm wrong, I just feel Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 are playing a huge part in all of this, but there's a lot of moving parts here. So I don't know. I
very
don't.
true. Very very true. Well, with that said, just want to thank the audience for listening in to the stream and those who will be listening in on the replay. This is the first ever two header that we're definitely going to be start implementing going forward. So that way we can for sure get into a lot of the other nations during this time in the 1920s, what they experienced besides what Germany experienced with the Weimar Republic. It is compare and contrast, and to me, that's the beauty of it. Being able
Mm,
to compare and contrast what other nations are going through during this same time period. To
mm,
me, that's where I truly feel we can kind of see, okay, while this was going on with the beer hall pooch and with Hitler spending some time in prison and then being able to um, do some things differently leading up to the fall of, well, I wouldn't say the fall, but just the stock market crash in that matter. All of this going on, the build up to it, while that's happening, what's going on with these other countries as well? And what they're
Mm.
doing and what they're seeing in the same time frame. So that way it's kind of like showing that, hey, while one nation is, kind of doing this thing and, doing something different and trying to see how things goes, let's see what other nations are doing that, for the most part, some of them were more established and were definitely kind of uh, uh, we're definitely kind of building up, as far as the things that on the opposite end of what they did after World War One. I'm definitely going to be curious to see how they went about things differently, in their respective era during that time.
Yeah, definitely, for sure, for sure. Really, really quick question. This ship that you have in your background, is that the Scharnhorst?
No, the ship that we see in the background is H, none other than Bismarck. That's
Oh, that's
going
the
on the sea trials.
Bismarck. Okay, so that must have been before the Atlantic bow was fitted. Okay,
Right? Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it was just getting ready to go on the sea trials and
The sea trials.
just get,
Okay, yeah, because
yeah,
the Atlantic bow was not fitted until after it completed sea trials and was delivered to the Kriegsmarine. Then they fitted it with the Atlantic bow and painted it with the camouflage.
right. So that's why you see that it's still in its like pretty much, all of its gears being started, and you can see that the guys in the background are kind of like still looking around and seeing how the beauty of the ships and everything, as far as, you know it haven't too long just, been launched per se. So now it's getting ready to like, okay,
Hmm.
let's see what this bad boy can do once we can get the boilers going, and after, we kind of see some test runs, then kind of see, okay, let's make some modifications. Let's paint her with different color, or not her, excuse me, because Hitler said this is he, this
He,
is him.
him.
So
you
so
know,
respectfully, we're going to call it that based off of what Hitler says when it was launched. So that
mm,
too is going to be interesting.
personally, again, I know that I'm biased, but between Japanese battleship design, American design, French design, and British and German, personally, I've always been partial to German battleship design. Just a personal choice. I, I've always liked the arrangements better than the others. Personally, I've always found Japanese design to be a bit crazy to me because instead of having two or three structures, they put everything in one super tall structure. It just never looked, you know, visually appealing to me. Just again, only a choice.
Well, sir, definitely. We're going to get into why they went with the pagoda, as they
Okay.
say, because they base a lot of their infrastructure for, the mass of the battleships and everything based off
Mhm.
of the pagoda. And later
Ah,
on, we're going to see why they did that,
okay.
which, give or take, some people thought, that kind of gave it, some a unique advantage per se, and then
Mm,
some that's like, it could have been better. And I'm kind of
mm,
one where, to me, I'm with you where it could have been improved upon. there's some things where they kind of studied a little bit better from their Western powers at the time and their Western allies,
Mhm.
like Germany and like America. It could have done some things differently had they not have been uh, had they not been too much of seeing the Western powers as enemies per se. But which is why it's interesting. Like after World War II, once they fully embraced the Western powers and really took upon a lot of their technological advances, all of a sudden you just see a nation that just like literally just it's just like they just took technology and just ran crazy with it, and it's crazy because I like I said, it's going to be interesting how a lot of the stuff that they could have utilized
Right.
back during World War II and what they could have made some differences and all, they
Mhm.
took those ideas, made changes, and then it just like Japan just became a superpower. And the same thing happened with Germany too. They did the same thing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, because
that
it's funny because so German battleships had radar, and it
mm-hmm.
was better radar than what the British had. But where they placed it was a problem. So specifically with this ship, the Bismarck, they placed the radar too close and just above the second gun the second gun turret. So
Yep.
during the Battle of the Denmark Strait, where the Bismarck sank the flagship of the British Navy, the HMS Hood,
Mm-hmm.
the shockwave damaged the radar. So the superior advantage that the ship had, gone right away.
Mm-hmm.
And Japanese submarines, I did not know this. Japanese submarines during the war, they did not have radar. American submarines did.
Yes, sir. That's true. And
That
it
is mind blowing to me.
and believe me, oh, I can't wait when we talk about especially why the Japanese did not do a third wave attack during Pearl Harbor, which they should have went after a lot of the submarine uh, 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 building blocks that were stationed at Pearl Harbor. And it was really the submarines, the U.S. submarines, that did the most damage during the Pacific War and World War II because, like you said, the Japanese did not use radar for their submarines, but the Americans did. And the Americans took advantage of that
Hmm.
after Pearl Harbor because you, the Japanese did not go through with their third wave of attack and decided to go home afterwards. It was the submarines.
Hmm.
I know the Americans, history talks about how, because the Japanese did not take advantage and really went and searched for the American aircraft carriers. And because of that, the carriers were the ones that really, so to speak, uh, uh, were terrorizing and really ran amok during the Pacific War. But people don't realize, and I got video that will show from my time at Pearl Harbor, documenting the setups and everything and such. It was the submarines
Hmm.
that really brought the Japanese to their knees.
Well, also, number one, satellites did not exist. So
Mm-hmm.
a fleet could literally hide out at sea. And no planes, none, not fighters, not bombers, none of them had radar. Everything
Mm-mm.
had to be line of sight and navigating to to keep your place to where you are in relation to the carrier. So when planes would actually go out and launch from the carrier, to try to find a fighting force. And if you couldn't find them, you had to turn around and fly back to your carrier.
Mm-hmm.
So even carrier-based radar did not have the range that they do now. So it was literally possible to play hide and go seek on the high seas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And Admiral Nagumo, who was the task force commander, didn't he say he was under the impression that the carriers were laying in wait for him, so he wanted to pull his planes back and save the carriers because he knew that there were more battles to come. At least that was his thinking.
Right. For him, and we're really going to deep dive as to why Admiral Nagumo did not, you know, take advantage of its forces at the time and sent out that third wave that could have done a lot more damage than what was really sought and what was really documented. It is an interesting aspect, and I can't wait to when we really get into those things, really study forth and all, because we're really going to see the what ifs from a lot of places, not just from the the Pacific side, but even from the European side, the European front. There were a lot of what ifs that had not just the leaders, but just the nations overall, had they done things maybe slightly different
Yeah,
in their mindset, it really could have changed it. Like when we talk about how much World War II was the turning point of history, we're not joking. Like a lot of technological aspects, a lot of social engineering, a lot of things that, I'm just gonna be honest, people take advantage today, had things kind of been a little bit different, even just by a slight difference, who knows where history would have went right after that. So,
exactly. In 1939, Britain was the most powerful country on earth. In
mm-hmm.
1945, Britain was a shell of its former self and could barely rebuild itself.
Yeah.
How quickly the tables turned. And hmm, America was a sleeping giant
Yeah.
in 1939. Sorry, 1941. 1941. Because the war started in 39. America didn't get into the war until December 7th, 1941.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's true.
1945, most powerful country on the planet.
Right. So can't wait to get into that, good sir. But with
You
that said, go right ahead.
one last thing. It has always surprised me how the top flag officers, a lot of them, they don't want war, especially the ones who've been in combat. They don't want war, but they're soldiers. They do their duty. When the orders come down to fight war, they fight. They fight the most effective war that they possibly can. But it's funny how many of them, if given the choice, they don't want war.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're always gonna have your hawks who believe, you know, destroy the enemy now with overwhelming fire force, but just I've just always found that interesting. That's all.
Indeed, indeed. Well, with that said, we are definitely going to close out tonight's stream. And even though JJ Wilson, shout out to him that said a rare Tuesday stream, going forward is not going to be so rare. There will be times where it could be a stream on Tuesdays, at least, here in America. Right now, over in Germany, where our good host Logic Finance that it's Wednesday morning. So, it could definitely go either way. It could be a Tuesday stream, could be a Wednesday stream. Who knows? But going forward, we are definitely going to be hitting a lot of these topics to kind of help speed the timeline, but also kind of dig deeper to see what was going on during this time frame. So that way we kind of keep up with, I would say, comparisons between the 20s back then and the 20s now. Hint, hint for the audience. But with that said, I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. My co-host, Logic Finest, is here with us as well to go on with that. But with that said, we just want to thank the audience. Until next time.
Be well.